There were shadows of the law, a love between two policewomen. The gunshot echoed through the abandoned warehouse as Officer Maya. Chen pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. 3 meters away, partially hidden behind a rusted metal container, Officer Sarah Mitchell returned fire. Her jaw set in that expression of fierce determination Maya had come to know so well over the past 2 years. What the criminal suspects cornered in this building didn't know, what their department didn't know, what the entire world couldn't see, was that these two women weren't just partners in law enforcement. They were partners in a love so profound and so forbidden by the unspoken rules of their conservative precinct that they had been forced to hide it in, shadows darker than any crime scene they had ever investigated. Maya had joined the police force 6 years ago, with stars in her eyes and justice in her heart. She came from a traditional Chinese family where duty and honor were everything, where her parents had sacrificed decades of their lives, working in a small restaurant so she could have opportunities they never had. When she told them she wanted to be a police officer, her mother had wept with pride, imagining her daughter upholding the law, protecting the innocent, perhaps one day marrying a respectable man and giving them grandchildren. Maya had nodded and smiled, never telling them about the truth she had discovered about herself in college, the truth that made her different, the truth that made her love women. She buried that part of herself deep inside, thinking that perhaps if she focused on her career, on making a difference, on being the best officer she could be, that empty space in her heart wouldn't ache quite so much. Then Sarah Mitchell transferred to their precinct from another city, and everything changed. Sarah was everything Maya wasn't. Where Maya was reserved and careful, Sarah was bold and passionate. Where Maya followed every rule to the letter, Sarah believed in the spirit of justice over bureaucracy. Sarah had short blonde hair that she refused to grow out despite the older officers, muttering about professionalism, and she had eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to see right through every wall Maya had built around herself. They were assigned as partners on a routine case, nothing dramatic, just investigating a series of break-ins in a residential neighborhood. But during those long hours in the patrol car, during the stakeouts where they shared coffee and stories about why they had chosen this difficult path, something shifted between them. Maya found herself laughing for the first time in years, really laughing, the kind that made her stomach hurt and tears streamed down her face. Sarah told stories about growing up with 3 brothers, who taught her to fight and never back down, about losing her father to a heart attack when she was 16 and realizing that life was too short to live for anyone's expectations but your own. The connection between them grew like a wildfire, impossible to contain, dangerous and beautiful all at once. It started with lingering glances that lasted a heartbeat too long, with hands that touched during moments they didn't need to, with excuses to spend time together even off duty. Maya knew she was falling in love, and it terrified her more than any armed suspect ever had. She thought about her parents, about her career, about everything she might lose. But Sarah had a way of making the world feel smaller, of making Maya believe that perhaps love wasn't something to be feared but something to be embraced, even if the world wasn't ready to accept it. Their first kiss happened on a rainy night after they had successfully apprehended a domestic violence suspect. They were both soaked, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. And when Sarah looked at Maya with those storm cloud eyes and said she was the bravest person she had ever met, Maya couldn't hold back anymore. She kissed Sarah right there in the rain, tasting coffee and rainwater and possibility. And for the first time in her entire life, Maya felt completely whole. But being in love while living in shadows came with a price that grew heavier with each passing day. They couldn't hold hands walking into the precinct. They couldn't share the looks that other couples did, the casual intimacy that heterosexual partners took for granted. When other officers talked about their wives and husbands, their weekends and anniversaries, Maya and Sarah had to remain silent or make up stories about fictional boyfriends to avoid suspicion. The precinct wasn't officially discriminatory. There were policies on paper about equality and inclusion, but the reality was different. Maya had heard the jokes, the way certain officers sneered about pride parades or made comments about women who looked too masculine. She saw how one officer, who had come out years ago, was consistently passed over for promotions, how he was excluded from the Informal networks that really determined who succeeded in law enforcement. The message was clear even if unspoken. You could be gay, but you couldn't be openly gay and expect to be treated equally. So Maya and Sarah lived double lives. Professional partners by day, lovers in secret by night. Always careful, always watching. Always afraid that one slip would cost them everything they had worked for. The strain of hiding began to fracture something between them. Sarah grew frustrated with the secrecy, with pretending, with Maya's fear of being discovered. She wanted to live authentically, to tell people about the woman she loved, to stop acting like their relationship was something shameful that needed to be hidden, away like evidence in a cold case. Maya understood Sarah's frustration, felt it echoing in her own heart, but her fear was stronger. She thought about her parents finding out not just that she was gay, but that she had been lying to them for years. She thought about losing her career, the whispers that would follow her, the way respect could evaporate overnight. They began to argue, quiet, tense conversations, in Maya's apartment where Sarah would plead for them to be brave together, and Maya would explain all the reasons they couldn't, not yet, maybe never. The love between them remained strong, that hadn't diminished, but it was being tested in ways that most couples never had to endure. They were fighting not just for their relationship, but against a system that didn't want to acknowledge they had the right to love each other in the first place. Everything came to a devastating head on a night that started like any other patrol. They received a call about suspicious activity in an industrial area on the edge of town, the kind of routine check that they had done hundreds of times before. But when they arrived, they found themselves stumbling into something much bigger, a drug operation that immediately turned violent. The suspects scattered, and Maya and Sarah found themselves separated, pursuing different targets through the maze of warehouses. Maya heard the gunshot before she saw Sarah go down, heard her partner cry out in pain, and in that moment every fear she had ever had about losing Sarah became horrifyingly real. Maya ran toward the sound, screaming into her radio for backup, her training and her terror warring inside her. When she found Sarah lying behind that metal container, blood spreading across her shoulder, Maya forgot about protocols, forgot about hiding, forgot about everything except that the woman she loved was hurt. She dropped beside Sarah, her hands shaking as she applied pressure to the wound, and she whispered things she had never said out loud in public. Words like "my love," like "don't leave me," like "I can't lose you." Sarah looked up at her through the pain, managing a weak smile, and said the words that would change everything. "Tell them the truth, Maya. Whatever happens, promise me you'll stop hiding who we are." The backup arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours. The paramedics took Sarah away in an ambulance, and Maya rode with her, holding her hand openly for the first time in front of their fellow officers. In the hospital waiting room, surrounded by colleagues and supervisors, Maya made a choice. When the captain asked about Sarah's condition, about what had happened, Maya told the truth. Not just about the operation, but about everything. She told them that Sarah wasn't just her partner. She was the person Maya loved most in the world. She told them about living in fear, about hiding, about how exhausting it was to pretend that the most important relationship in her life didn't exist. The silence that followed felt crushing, and Maya prepared herself for judgment, for consequences, for everything she had spent years trying to avoid. But then something unexpected happened. One of the older officers, a gruff veteran named Martinez, who Maya had always assumed would be least accepting, stepped forward. He put a hand on Maya's shoulder and said that all he cared about was that Sarah was a damn good cop and Maya was too, and that love was love regardless of who it was between. Other officers nodded, some looking uncomfortable but not hostile. And while Maya knew not everyone in that waiting room accepted them, enough did that she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Sarah recovered from her injury over the following weeks, and during that time, things shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Maya finally told her parents the truth, a conversation that was as difficult as she had feared, filled with her mother's tears and her father's long silences. But after the initial shock, after the questions and the confusion, her parents didn't abandon her. They didn't understand completely, not yet, but they told her that they loved her and that they needed time to process this news. It wasn't the acceptance Maya had dreamed of, but it was a beginning, a foundation they could build on. At the precinct, reactions were mixed. Some officers were genuinely supportive, others clearly uncomfortable but professional. And yes, there were a few who made their disapproval known. through cold shoulders and muttered comments. Maya and Sarah faced discrimination that was both overt and subtle. Being passed over for certain assignments, dealing with officers who refused to partner with them. But they also found allies they hadn't expected, and they discovered strength in no longer having to hide, in being able to be themselves without the constant exhausting performance of straightness. The most profound change, however, was in their relationship itself. Without the weight of secrecy crushing them, Maya and Sarah's love grew deeper and stronger. They could hold hands walking to their car after shift, could talk openly about their weekend plans, could be partners in every sense of the word without fear. Maya realized that all those years she had spent hiding, she had been giving power to fear rather than to love, letting other people's potential judgment control her life. Sarah had been right all along about the importance of living authentically, even when that authenticity came with a cost. They still faced challenges. Discrimination didn't disappear overnight, but they faced those challenges together, openly, as partners who refused to hide anymore. They began attending LGBTQ community events, becoming visible role models for young people who dreamed of careers in law, enforcement but worried about being accepted. They showed up at pride parades in uniform with permission from a new, more progressive captain who believed that diversity made the force stronger, not weaker. A year after Sarah was shot, on the anniversary of that night that changed everything, Maya took Sarah back to that industrial area where they had nearly lost each other. They stood outside the warehouse, now empty and quiet in the daylight, and Maya pulled out a small box she had been carrying for weeks. She got down on one knee right there in the dirt and concrete, and she asked Sarah to marry her, to be her partner not just in law enforcement but in life. Officially and publicly and proudly, Sarah said yes through tears that matched Maya's own, and when they kissed, Maya felt the sun on her face and realized that she was no longer living in shadows. She was living in light, the kind of brilliant, honest light that comes from being exactly who you are, from loving who you love without apology or fear. The ring on Sarah's finger caught the sunlight as they held each other. Two women who had chosen to be brave, who had decided that love was worth fighting for even when the world made that fight so much harder than it should be. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe in love that refuses to hide, if you've ever felt the courage it takes to be yourself in a world that sometimes makes that dangerous, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Your engagement helps stories like Maya and Sarah's reach people who might be struggling with their own truth, who might need to know they're not alone. Sometimes a simple click can create ripples of hope that spread further than we can imagine. Their wedding took place on a spring day when the cherry blossoms were in full bloom, creating a canopy of pink and white that felt like nature itself was celebrating their union. Maya's parents attended, sitting in the front row with expressions that mixed lingering uncertainty with undeniable love for their daughter. Sarah's brothers stood as groomsmen, each of them having welcomed Maya into their family with the same fierce protectiveness they showed their sister. Officers from their precinct filled the seats, in uniform and in civilian clothes, a visible representation that progress was possible even in institutions slow to change. When Maya and Sarah exchanged vows, promising to honor and protect each other the way they protected their community, there wasn't a dry eye in the venue. They spoke about shadows and light, about fear and courage, about the power of love to transform not just individual lives but entire communities when people refuse to accept that discrimination is inevitable or permanent. Before we reach the end of this journey, I want to ask you something from the heart. If Maya and Sarah's story has moved you, if you believe that love deserves to be celebrated in all its forms, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own experiences with finding the courage to live authentically. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. To find their own bravery, the comment section can become a space of solidarity and support. So please take a moment to add your voice to this conversation. Maya and Sarah continue to serve their community as police officers, and they do so now as their full, authentic selves. They've faced setbacks and victories, moments of discrimination and moments of unexpected support. But through it all, they've remained true to the promise they made to each other in that warehouse on the worst and best night of their lives. They've learned that living in shadows might feel safer, but it's not really living at all. True life, the kind that fills your chest with breath and your heart with joy, Happens in the light. Happens when you decide that your love is not something to apologize for, but something to celebrate. Their story is a reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply loving openly and refusing to hide. In a world that still has so far to go toward equality, Maya and Sarah walk forward together, no longer in shadows but in the brilliant, honest light of a love that refused to be diminished, a love that chose bravery over fear, truth over hiding, and each other over everything else.